The first time Karma asked for my permission, I thought I was trapped in a nightmare. The voice came at exactly 3 o'clock every morning. It slipped into my dreams like smoke beneath a locked door, calm, patient, and terrifyingly certain. It never introduced itself. It never explained why it had chosen me. It simply asked one question, as though my answer carried the weight of someone else's fate. Do you give your permission? That night, the name it spoke was Derek Pohl. I said no. Of course I did. You don't bargain with mysterious voices in your sleep. You wake up, shake it off, and convince yourself stress is playing tricks on your mind. The voice didn't argue. It simply whispered. Very well. I'll ask again. By morning, it swung into action. That's when I realized the voice had never been asking for my opinion. It had been asking for my decision. My name is Mara Voss, and I'm a nurse. For the past 3 years, I've worked the night shift at St. Catherine's Hospital, a place where the fluorescent lights never seem to dim, where grief echoes long after visiting hours end, and where every hallway carries memories someone wishes they could forget. Mine has only one. My younger sister, Ellie. She died on a cold Tuesday night in the very building where I still work. Not because her condition couldn't be treated. Not because help wasn't available. But because the doctor responsible for her care chose to finish a personal phone call before responding to an emergency. That doctor was Derek Pohl. The investigation called it a tragic delay. The hospital called it an unfortunate mistake. A month later, they rewarded him with a promotion. I thought leaving would help me heal. Instead, I stayed. Maybe because walking away felt like abandoning Ellie all over again. Maybe because I wanted to believe that if I kept helping strangers survive, somehow her death would still mean something. Until the night the silence started speaking to me. And everything I believed about justice changed forever. If you enjoy stories filled with impossible mysteries, unforgettable twists, and emotional journeys, you're in the right place. Subscribe and settle in, because this is only the beginning. By morning, Derek Pohl's medical license was under review. Someone had found a mistake in his old records, a mistake that had been sitting there for 3 years, waiting. Waiting, it seemed, for my permission. The permission I never gave. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Hospitals are full of strange coincidences. But that night, the voice came back. This time it didn't ask about Derek. It said a name I hadn't spoken out loud in over 10 years. A name from when I was 19. It asked if I understood what saying yes would cost me this time. The next one is waiting, it said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I was already awake, and the waiting had already started. I didn't tell anyone about the voice. Who would I even tell? Priya, the charge nurse, who already thought I worked too many doubles? My mom, who still can't say Ellie's name without her voice shaking. So I just watched. Derek Pohl's review turned into a suspension. The hospital called it an internal matter, like 3 years of my grief could fit inside 2 boring words. I read the notice on the break room bulletin board twice, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My hands were shaking by the second read. I almost laughed at that phrase, internal matter. I didn't laugh for long. Because the voice had said a second name, and this one wasn't a stranger. It was Callum Reyes. 11 years ago, in a stairwell I still dream about sometimes, he told a lie about me in front of 200 people at our old school. I never got to correct it. By the time I found out how far it had spread, everyone had already decided who I was. I had spent 10 years building a life where I never had to think about that stairwell again, a new city, a new job, a new version of myself who didn't flinch at crowded hallways. That night, I didn't really sleep. I lay in bed with my phone face down on my chest, like turning it over might make the voice arrive faster. I just waited. The voice came anyway. I was starting to understand it always would, whether I waited for it or not. Do you get permission, it asked, for what happens to Callum Reyes? Why do you even need permission, I said out loud, to my empty apartment, to whatever this thing was, if it's going to happen anyway? Silence stretched out so long I thought it might not answer at all. Then it said, because the ones who don't ask are the ones people learn to fear. I am not one of those. It sounded almost polite. Strange, coming from something that had no reason to be polite to me at all. I sat up in bed and pulled my knees to my chest, the way I used to when I was a kid and couldn't sleep. I sat with that thought for a long time. But the thing that scared me most wasn't the voice. It wasn't even how much it seemed to know about Derek and Callum and every wound I'd spent years burying under work schedules and small talk. It was that some small, ugly, honest part of me actually wanted to say yes. I hated that part of myself more than I had ever hated Callum Reyes. I said nothing instead. I was learning that silence could be its own kind of answer. And the voice seemed to take it that way too, because when I finally looked at my phone, an hour had passed, and the room was still and empty, and I was alone again with my own thoughts for company. Callum Reyes's name showed up online 3 days later. It wasn't a punishment, not exactly. It was more like the truth just came out. An old accusation he had buried for years surfaced through a source no one could trace. Not even me, and I was the one who had, somehow, said yes without ever actually saying the word. I read the story standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, coffee going cold in my hands. My phone had buzzed with a news alert, of all things, like the universe wanted me to see it the second I woke up. I felt something I didn't expect. Relief and dread tangled together so tight I couldn't tell them apart. I set the mug down before I dropped it. I thought about calling in sick that day. I didn't. I went to work, checked vitals, changed 4 bags, smiled at patients who had no idea their nurse was carrying something far heavier than a clipboard. That night I finally asked the only question that mattered. What are you? And why me? The voice answered with a question of its own, like it always did. Why do you think it has to be you? Because you keep showing up in my bedroom at 3 in the morning, I said. That feels pretty specific. The voice didn't laugh, if it even could laugh. It just went quiet again, the way it always did when I pushed too hard for an answer it didn't want to give. I stayed up until almost dawn digging through Ellie's old boxes in my hallway closet, the ones I hadn't opened since the funeral. My hands were dusty by the time I found it, a letter from our grandmother, written the year before she died, tucked inside an old recipe tin along with a few photographs and a chipped hair clip that used to be Ellie's. Our grandmother wrote about a family debt, owed and never collected. I used to think that was just something an old woman said to sound wise, the kind of line you nod along to at Thanksgiving and forget by dessert. I wasn't so sure anymore. I read the letter 4 times. Then I read it a 5th time, out loud, to my empty kitchen, like saying it might make it clearer. It didn't. But it did make one thing obvious: my grandmother had known something about this voice, or something like it, long before I ever heard it whisper Derek Pohl's name into my sleep. And she had never told my mother, or me, or anyone. Whatever this debt was, she had carried it alone, and now, somehow, it had found its way to me. Priya noticed the change in me before I was ready to admit it to myself. The tired eyes I kept covering with concealer. The way I flinched every time an unknown number lit up my phone screen during our shift. When she finally cornered me in the supply closet and asked if I was okay, really okay, I lied to her, the same way I'd been lying about everything since the voice showed up. Just not sleeping well, I told her. It wasn't technically false. Priya didn't push. She just handed me a granola bar from her scrub pocket and told me to eat something before I passed out on a patient. That was Priya. She noticed everything and forced nothing. Then, 2 nights later, the voice asked its hardest question yet. It wanted permission for something involving Priya's ex-husband, a man named Owen I barely knew outside of the name Priya spat out like a curse whenever his child support checks came late. I learned that night, through the voice, that Owen had hurt someone Priya loved in ways she had never once told me about, a detail so specific and so painful that I understood immediately it wasn't something I was supposed to know. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time before I answered. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what saying yes actually costs, the voice said. It is never as clean as it feels in the moment. Saying yes felt like playing God with a life that wasn't mine to touch. Saying no felt like turning my back on someone Priya loved, someone who had already been hurt once and might never get any kind of answer for it. For the first time since this all started, I understood something important, something that settled into my chest like a stone. This wasn't a gift. It never had been. It was a weight, dressed up to look like power, and I had been foolish enough to almost enjoy carrying it. I didn't say yes that night. I didn't say no either. I told the voice I needed time, and for the first time, it actually gave me some, 3 full days of silence that felt less like mercy and more like it was waiting to see what kind of person I really was underneath all my hesitation. The truth came at the worst possible moment, the way the truth always seems to. I was standing in the hospital parking lot after a 16-hour shift, keys in hand, too exhausted to even feel afraid, when the voice spoke to me in broad daylight for the first time. It had never done that before. It had always waited for 3 in the morning, for sleep, for the dark. "You asked why you," it said. "It was never only you." Then it told me, plain and simple, that Derek Pohl's fall from grace wasn't random at all. It had been waiting for 20 years, because someone before me had refused to give permission for it, over and over, every single time it was offered. Someone in my own family. I dropped my keys. I actually dropped them, right there in the parking lot, and had to crouch down on shaking legs to pick them back up while a stranger walked past and asked if I was okay. I wasn't. I told them I was anyway. My grandmother's letter wasn't just an old woman's superstition, some pretty phrase about debts and permission scribbled to sound wise for a granddaughter who would find it after she was gone. It was a record. A confession, almost. I wasn't the first person this voice had ever spoken to. I was the second. And the first one, my grandmother, had said no so many times across so many years that the debt just sat there, patient as a stone at the bottom of a river, waiting for someone who might finally answer differently. I drove home in silence that night. No radio, no phone calls, just my hands on the wheel and my mind trying to rearrange 20 years of family history around one impossible fact. My grandmother had died when I was 18, quiet and small in a hospital bed not unlike the ones I worked around every night now. I used to think she'd just run out of time. Now I wondered if she'd run out of chances instead, if she'd spent her whole life refusing something that eventually had to land somewhere, on someone. It had landed on me. Once I knew the truth, I stopped waiting for the voice's questions. I started asking my own, night after night, even when it didn't answer right away. Where did this thing come from? What happened to people who said no too many times, the way my grandmother had? Was it even a person once, or something else entirely, something that had never had a body or a name of its own? The voice's answers got shorter. Almost like it didn't want to tell me, or like there were rules about what it could and couldn't say, rules older than either of us. "You keep dodging that one," I told it one night, sitting cross-legged on my kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, too wound up to stay in bed. "Some answers are not mine to give freely," it said. "They must be earned." Then, finally, it admitted something that changed everything. Saying no didn't erase the debt. It only passed it along, to someone else, someone who might not be as careful as I had tried to be, someone who might say yes to everything without ever asking why. That night, it told me exactly who would carry the debt if I refused one more time. My mother. I didn't sleep after that. I sat by my window and watched the sky turn from black to gray to the pale orange of early morning, thinking about my mother's voice cracking every time she said Ellie's name, thinking about how much more that voice might break under something like this. She had already lost one daughter. I couldn't let her lose herself too, not to some ancient debt she didn't even know existed, one that belonged to a mother she had buried over a decade ago. I called her that morning, just to hear her voice, just to make sure it still sounded like her. She asked why I was calling so early. I told her I just missed her. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I was starting to understand that most of what I said these days lived somewhere in that space between the two. I finally faced something I'd been running from since the day Ellie died. Some part of me had wanted Derek Pohl destroyed, not just corrected, not just quietly reviewed by a hospital committee that would forget his name within a year. I had wanted him to suffer the way Ellie suffered, alone in a hallway while he finished a phone call that wasn't even important. And wanting that didn't make me a monster. It just made me human, tired and grieving and furious in ways I had never let myself fully feel until a voice in the dark forced me to look at it directly. I said all of this out loud one night, to no one, to the voice, to my own reflection in the dark kitchen window. It felt like confession. It felt like the first honest thing I'd said in 3 years. The voice didn't respond right away. When it finally did, its tone was different, softer somehow, if a voice with no body could even have a tone at all. "You are allowed to want justice," it said. "That was never the question I was asking you." "Then what were you asking?" "Whether you could carry the weight of getting it." That's when I understood what this voice really was. It wasn't karma, not the way I'd always pictured it, some huge and fair force floating above the world, keeping score on everyone equally. It was smaller than that, and older than that, and far more personal. It was a promise my grandmother had made and never finished, given a strange kind of half-life, drifting from one boss woman to the next, searching for someone brave enough to finally close it for good instead of just passing it further down the family line. I thought about the recipe tin in my hallway closet, about the chipped hair clip that used to be Ellie's, about the letter with my grandmother's careful handwriting. 3 generations of women in my family had touched pieces of this same unfinished thing, and none of us had known it until it was too late to ask each other about it. I wasn't going to let it reach a 4th. The voice gave me a choice on a night that felt heavier than all the others combined. Close the debt myself, right now, tonight, or pass it forward one more time, the way every boss woman before me apparently had, whether on purpose or not. I chose neither option it offered. Instead, I asked it something I had never asked before, not once, in all our 3 a.m. conversations. Not for permission. For a name. Tell me who this actually belongs to, I said. Not Derek. Not Callum. Not Owen. Who is this debt really for? The silence that followed felt longer than any before it, long enough that I started to think it wouldn't answer at all, long enough that I got up and made myself a cup of tea just to have something to do with my shaking hands. Then it spoke. The answer wasn't Derek Pohl. It wasn't Callum Reyes. It was Ellie. I sat down hard on my kitchen floor, tea forgotten on the counter, and I let myself cry in a way I hadn't allowed since the funeral. Because suddenly it all made sense in a horrible, clarifying way. My grandmother's refusals, all those years of saying no, hadn't stopped anything. They had only delayed it, pushed it further down the family line, until it finally landed on the one person in our family who never got a chance to refuse anything at all. Ellie never asked for this. Ellie never even knew this existed. She had simply been standing in the wrong hallway, at the wrong hospital, under the care of the wrong doctor, at the exact moment a debt 3 generations old finally ran out of places to hide. The debt had always been about my sister. I gave the voice my answer 2 nights later, after I had finally stopped crying long enough to think clearly. Not revenge. Not another name handed over to whatever came next, passed down the family line like a curse disguised as an heirloom. I told it I wanted the debt to end with me, completely, no matter what that cost me personally. I don't want anyone else's name, I said. Not Owen's. Not my mother's. Not some stranger's kid 20 years from now who never even meets me. It ends here. The voice went quiet longer than it ever had before, so long I thought maybe I had finally asked for something even it couldn't give. Then, for the very first time, it didn't ask a question. Permission granted, it said. This debt is yours to close, not yours to carry. I woke up the next morning like it was any other day, sunlight through my blinds, the smell of coffee I didn't remember starting. Derek Pohl's suspension stood on its own now, built on the truth of his own charting records, not owed to anything else, not resting on some invisible scale I had no part in. Callum Reyes's secret stayed out in the open too, exactly as it already was, no longer tied to me or to anything I had said yes or no to. But so did my own peace, finally, real and steady, with never having asked for any of it in the first place. I went to work that night the same as always. I checked vitals. I changed 4 bags. I walked past the hallway where Ellie died, and for the first time in 3 years, it was just a hallway. I still work nights. I still walk the same hallway where I lost Ellie. But I don't listen for a voice at 3 in the morning anymore. Some mornings, honestly, I almost miss it. The strange comfort of being asked, instead of just having to carry whatever life decided to hand me. I've learned that some debts aren't meant to be collected. They're meant to be let go. One story ends here, but another unforgettable journey is about to begin. Subscribe now, and I'll see you in the next chapter.